This is our review session for the exam, and covering any kinds of questions you want to raise more generally. And I'll also remind you that not many people, I think, in this class are probably pursuing it, but you can do a paper. You can also do, and many people are doing that, memos. There's no precise definition of anything that is required for either the memo or the paper somehow relating to the course. Usually for the memos, they may, for some people, they're pretty much following up on particular readings in that week or so, and that's fine. But don't just summarize the reading. If that's fine for you to have in your head first, but ideally compare, we'll look for any, there you go, masks, look for anything more general, comparisons, generalizations, especially the classic thing which most studies, most things we read, not just students, but journal articles, don't include the context. So many papers are just descriptive. You know, I went to downtown, and there were lots of people in the cafes, and there were people in the restaurants, and it was exciting. Okay. Second might be to say, what's the dependent variable? Exciting, density, downtown, all of those. Are those dependent or then independent variables? Are they simply associated, or is there a set of causal arrows, maybe A, B, C, or X, 1, 2, 3, 4, leading to this, which is more of a social science kind of theory, and looking for could be hypotheses, even if there are none in the readings. If they're here, there's a reason for it. Try to ask yourself, here's a bigger question, why is this reading on the syllabus? How does this fit with something else which is more important? As almost everything on the readings are relatively, they've got a reason for them. And so we usually try to point this out to you with a couple of lines for almost every single reading. And so look at those and say, yeah, okay, but there are lots of other things I was interested in, and not just I was, but it has importance from other things as well. And if you do that, then these are the kinds of exam questions you can answer and think about, because you've thought about yourselves week by week by week. Now you can pull the pieces together. I mean, I remember when I was a student doing things, just nearby the exam, you have a good sense of, a wonderful sense of synthesis. Wow, I see now these pieces fit together. Or here's a new paper that ought to be done. Or here's a vacuum which is omitted. Here's something wrong from these two studies, and they're answered by these three other studies. Something like that. So think about them and try to put together a comparison among these. And these are what I'm telling you in these comments is not just preparing for an exam, but doing research. I mean, other people in knowledge-based humanities, as well as the social sciences, natural sciences. These are classic kinds of questions which everybody asks. And if you try to think that way in all your classes, in that sense, they should help. Okay, that's a general overview on papers, exams, preparation. What should you do more specifically? Maybe review what you've done. Well, review what you're done with your own notes. If you've got notes, or you've got marked up, or you say put it in a Word document, or if you haven't, you might do it in the future or now. Put in your own Word document commenting all the readings that you've done. If you haven't done everything, understandable, but comment on what you've read thoughtfully now, and review that now as you can see the pieces coming together, what we may have discussed here, what the other later readings may have said, and so forth. Second, first look at your notes. Second, look at the syllabus and what we've said. And then third, try to compare and look for something original that you may have in the way of an observation. For instance, you may come from a town in Maine, a smaller town in Maine, but has some distinctive characteristics. And if that really makes you more sensitive to some things than the author or the class discussion we've heard, how could you add more insight by bringing in, and so here's a concept I've mentioned 3 or 4 times, deviant case analysis. Seymour Martin Lipset did this especially. He mentioned, why is there no socialism in America? It's a big theoretical question. It was a major issue for Marxists in the late 19th century, especially people in the Social Democratic Party in Germany. These were the smartest, active, theoretical people in the world. They were writing very, and this is the title by by one of the leaders, why is there no socialism in America? And Lipset spent a lot of his career on that same question, as he said. This was his PhD topic. And he went to, how did he try to answer it first? Who remembers that? We showed the video on this.
I forgot to say it was the person who watched the video that gave the 5 core values of the U.S.
That's a different one.
That's a different one?
That's a good answer, but that's not, well, in a sense, that's a second, that came 30 years later in Lipset's own work. He did not come up with that at the time of his PhD. It took him 30 years to work on it, and he decided his first answers were not so good, or at least they're not totally wrong, but they were different and complementary elaborating it. So his first answer really was more like I described as descriptive. That is, he found an example. He found a deviant case. And I'm mentioning this for Lipset because most of his big books have built on some kind of deviant case that doesn't fit what the quote normal theory. One was Michel's book called Political Parties, and his basic idea was parties dominate, and if you're at the bottom, you get crushed. And many people are talking this way about the 2 presidential leading candidates in the U.S. You know, these parties somehow are not representing the people in the middle and other people except for these party activists. Okay, and that's a classic 19th century criticism. Roberto Michels, M-I-C-H-E-L-S, and Lipset wrote a long introduction to this, and he thought about this, and so he then did and then he said, hey, Michels may be wrong. And he told us indirectly in the video, what did he learn growing up? That's a hint, growing up nearby his father and the people around his father, had he learned so that he could answer that better than Michels had? Anybody remember that? It was a crowd around, I think he said a bar or whatever, place his father frequently spent a lot of time, and his father's job was, anybody remember? Important for the okay. It was a printer, a typesetter, a person who would set the type. And in the 19th or 18th centuries and earlier, these were people who were literate. They could read, they could write, they could think about these things in ways that most people could not. Most people couldn't read at all. They didn't read books or whatever. So typesetters were a quasi-manual occupation, or repetitive kind of job, but it was different from most other people who were, say, working on a production line where everybody did the same thing. And so the nature of the work tended to lead to a different kind of union. And so, what was the difference between his father's union? The people he was hanging around with were often other printers, or there were people who were in New York, and did they talk about Republicans and Democrats? Remember if he said that? No, they never even mentioned. They didn't know about Republicans. What did they talk about? Bolsheviks, Trotskyites, anarchists. These were at the CCNY, City College of New York, were a very smart group of people who didn't get to have the money to get into the Ivy League schools, and they were heavily Jewish. Later on, these are now the elite in many of the top Ivy League schools. So the cultures have changed of these within these institutions. So Lipset said, hey, my own father and these people are talking about democracy. They're talking about candidates within the union. Who are we going to support for in this union? And we don't like him. We do like him over there. And then this guy in the same bar may say he may work in a different printing place, a different company, but they sort of know each other, and they're part of a bigger union together. And in one of the branches of the union, they have two candidates. In the second branch, they have one. They don't have any democracy in that simple sense of having two candidates, or maybe three candidates. So he did a major book called Union Democracy, and it basically showed why and how Michel's book was wrong. You don't always have. So Michel said, whoever says organization says despotism, says hierarchy, domination. Organizations tend to be dumb, and this is true if it's true of some organizations. So I mentioned a couple of times the American South speaks with what kind of an accent? Sorry, the military speaks with what kind of an accent? Southern accent. And what does that? What's the point of that anecdote, or that phrase? How does it relate to everything I'm saying? Yeah.
It's that the military's culture is based on Southern culture because they have a lot of people who live in the South are they have the same culture of hierarchical, based on slavery from the beginning. Yeah.
Yes. That's the point. The distinctive characteristic of the South, one simple big one, is slavery. And hierarchy, slaves did the hard work. People at the bottom tended to be small in number, and they didn't have democratic discussions of who's going to work today. Would you take the day off? No. So Lipset looked for deviant cases, and I'm giving you a couple of later cases. But his first one, just to come back with my first question, what did he do in his PhD? He found about, in North America, not in the U.S., but in Canada, Saskatchewan had a socialist party come to power. And so Lipset said, hey, why is Saskatchewan different for some reason if they've got a socialist party? In the same way that he asked later on, they have democracy within some unions, or within, taking it one step further, with some branches of his father's union. And that's what they then showed in detail, and that permitted them to get comparative data of big unions, small unions, more educated, less educated, big cities, small cities, those kinds of things, to see if they were associated with more or less democracy. And that remained, or that was, and that still remains, a model for how to analyze this kind of question. To start with a simple, abstract, general, where is there no socialism, or where is there no democracy? Here are ways of taking a deviant case and beginning to get some hypotheses, and then maybe in both of his cases, he then tried to test with with limited funds, limited time, limited staff. That's there. Okay, I don't want to talk much more except to answer the obvious questions that people want. What do I have to do to prepare for the exam? Okay, I've now answered that. And I'll remind you that this is also in the syllabus. Most of what I just said is in the syllabus, updated by things like the Lipset presentation. Questions, comments from anybody? About strategy, about specific readings, about why my town doesn't fit, or whatever.
What
Yes.
form of the question's gonna be like?
2 parts. The first part is IDs, identifications, brief, shorter identifications of concepts. And they're likely to be concepts which are relatively important concepts, which have probably been mentioned somewhere in the syllabus. If you ask yourself as you read the syllabus, do I know what these main concepts are that are being mentioned, especially in a couple of different readings? Second one is an essay, and there'll be a couple of candidates you can write an essay about, and this is a more general essay where you can try to show the kinds of knowledge of things which I mentioned to in my first 5 minutes. I think the essay is 6 counts. Is that right? Does that say that in the syllabus? I think it's 60% and 40%.
So yeah, 60% of your grade is the essay, and then 40% are the ID questions.
Yeah. And if you have if there's a if you're a non-English speaking person in background, you get to have extra
20 minutes.
20 minutes. And other people who have an official disability, that's a certain amount of time which is increased in that.
You'll just have to let me know about that or let both of us know about that if you have any sort of accommodation.
Yeah, those normally have been sent to me, and I think I've got 1 or 2, but not a lot. So sometimes students forget, or whatever people in that management office forgets to send it to us. But if you haven't seen something like that, check if you got a copy of it getting to me or getting to the others. If not, have them do so. Question?
I was just wondering if there are any common mistakes that you see on these midterm exams that would be helpful to be aware of and try to avoid.
You say any common mistakes? Is that what you said? Good question. I'm struggling.
I think the biggest one will just be a lack of clarity in your ideas. So really just make sure that you're staying grounded in the texts, and kind of, at least with the IDs, being concise about it, and with the essay questions, just being very, very clear about what it is that you're arguing.
And regarding the material that we'll be arguing with, will that be given to us on the paper, or is it just by memory, pulling from sources and concepts?
Yeah, so it's a take-home exam. You can use all of your notes on it. You can use your class notes and the readings themselves.
Yeah, it's okay to draw on and read or reread your notes for writing the exam. That's not plagiarism. If it comes from someone else, that's plagiarism.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. No plagiarism. The rules have this. These are all in writing from the university. Yeah. Or sorry, anything you wanted to analyze?
Yeah, I think that's it. Just so you'll be able to use your notes. So just, you can expand upon those, but you will be required to kind of make, at least for the essay questions, you're going to be required to make a statement on something and have your own thoughts on it. So just try to draw from the readings and really make your own opinion.
Thank you.
For the identification section, will it be more will it be oh, this is the concept, who authored it, or will it be this, what was their thoughts on this, shortly described?
Yeah.
In the question or the answer?
Which part is the answer the author, or is the answer the concept?
So what we want you to do for those is it's going to be a kind of a broad concept from any of the readings. And so what we want you to do is give a sort of brief description of the idea and then who put it forward, and then maybe a sentence about why it's important, or a sentence or two about why it's important in the larger context of the class and what we've learned. That'll all be on the instructions of the exam as well, so it'll be very straightforward when you see it.
How much time we should take us to finish the exam?
You have the full class period to do it. I really don't expect it to take super long, especially if you've done the readings and you have good notes. But yeah, you have the full class period to do it, so.
No, but you can do an essay in 10 minutes or 10 hours. And if you have 10 hours, we expect you to do more than if you have 10 minutes. So everybody has a class time. So I'd say if you finish and you got a half an hour left, don't just go home. Or that is, you're home doing this project. Put down something else, which is a significant way to elaborate in your essay. And idea, I had a hard time writing my PhD, and I'd had a whole lot of courses, a whole lot of exams. I still had trouble writing my mother would help me, and and I would say I've gotten better every decade. As I write more, it gets easier and more comfortable, and I sort of automatically do what she says. So it sounds easy, but doing it is part of why you're here. Seeing other people do this, so you not only you can answer the exam, but you're comfortable doing these kinds of things. For instance, I invited the director of finances of the city of Chicago to come to class one time. And one of the students asked a question, what's the most important thing for me to learn, or what's the most important thing to work with you on in a job in the Department of Finance at the city of Chicago? And what do you think he said? Writing a clear essay. Okay. Practice. So one more preparation you can do is give yourself, 1 hour, and what's it, an hour and 50 minutes?
I think it's an hour. That's a class period.
An hour and 20 minutes, okay, good. Give yourself an hour and 20 minutes and do the exam so you have a sense that I can't take 2 hours. I've only got that amount of time. And practice so that you have a sense of how long should each ID be, and how much time should I make an outline in advance, maybe 3 big points or 1 big point for my essay, and then I'll have, and what you'll say. And then finish the whole thing right on time and have time to send it in. And if your hard drive crashes, have you been making backups some way, or maybe even stick in a USB or something like that into your computer, and even make a copy there in case in case the whole thing you drop it on the floor. If you've got the little thumb drive and it's okay, and you've got 90% of it there. That happens to students. Yeah. At least I get many people who have things like that happen to them. Yes.
Just, I guess, inquiring further, I'm sure there's a lot online already, but with the media that was shown in class, like the videos and all the supplemental materials, if we were to take notes of them on those things and include them in our essay, could we also find them on Canvas to refer back to kind of refresh ourselves of what was shown in class?
What do you mean? During the exam?
Not during the exam, but just in preparation. Have those supplemental videos been uploaded as well?
Yeah, everything that we've shown to you should be on Canvas. Sometimes they're in weird places though. So I would go back through the modules, and under every week, if we showed you a video, it'll be like a document with the link to it on there.
Yeah, thank you. Just checking.
Mm-hmm.
It's just on the readings for the first 4 weeks, right? So
Sorry, a little slow.
it's just on the readings for the first 4 weeks. So it's mainly Sasa and Boschkin for week 2, because we put in the independent readings. Week 3 is McCarthy and McAdams, and week 4 is Elazar, Lipset. Okay, so just those, and like Tocqueville too.
Well, really all of the you
Yeah.
can use any of the readings that we did, including the supplementary ones,
Yeah.
to back up your kind of the points that you're trying to make. But yeah, the main ones on the that are listed under the weeks on the syllabus will be kind of where we're drawing from. So it would be helpful to look at the syllabus and see what was written under each reading and use that to prepare.
And can we use external sources for the essays, or you just want it to be straight up reading list?
Yeah, I didn't understand. Use the what?
Can we use external sources as well?
External sources. You mean, but also on the syllabus, or things which are external,
Things
not
that are
on the
completely external.
Yeah, no, yes, as long as you don't get too far diverted. But if you had read something in another course or something from the media or whatever, that's fine to bring in and show that you can find another example. But I'd say even better if you can see it challenging, say, the theory or the interpretation that we've got from somebody else, and sort of use it as a deviant case, and maybe try to ask yourself, and then maybe try to give us an answer, even in the exam. I mean, that would be a great example of doing something innovative yourself in the exam.
Yeah. As long as it's very clear why it's relevant,
Yeah.
then it'd be fine.
When it comes to like, as far as with the essay section, grounding it in the readings, are you, like, as long as we have the concepts and the ideas there, do we also need to be doing like referencing where in the text we got it, or is it just like more conceptually grounded?
I don't think you necessarily need to do like direct quotes and then cite them. I don't think that's super necessary. If that's something that's going to help you throughout the process of writing an essay, then go ahead, all for it. But as long as you're very clear in what you're trying to say, and as long as you get the text correct, if you're not completely like misconstruing the ideas presented in the text, then I think it's fine whatever way you want to do it.
But it's fine just to mention a name. You know, Lipset said you don't need to have every word in the title or the chapter of the book Bible. So. These names are also generally pretty important names for this whole area. So if you don't know any of their names, that's not good.
Right.
It'd be good to be able to talk about this to other people in another, students in another course. What did I learn, and how was it? Someone said, I took another course. How is it similar or different from this? And you can say, well, I don't remember any of the names of any. Yeah, what did you read? Oh, I don't remember any of the names. That's not good. You don't need to memorize everything, but at least have a sense of the big names.
From my perspective, the point of the exam really is to get you guys to think about how the authors can interact with each other, what their big ideas are, how they have contributed to the field more broadly.
Yes.
So as long as you're sort of doing that within the exam, I feel like you've got something out of it.
And try to do that each day, each time you read anything. This is certainly in this class, but more generally, ask yourself, read critically and try to comment critically yourself, and you'll be more creative. That's the idea. And so we're trying to show, the one reason to show you, say, a video, or to show you and to mention that Lipset said, he said something in his big popular book called Political Man, and then he began to think about it after 10, 20 years. Other people were attacking or disagreeing in different ways, and then he'd search out and he'd find people who had a different interpretation. So then he wrote a postfast, whatever it was called, the end of it, beyond the end that he wrote initially. 20 years later, he says, hey, here's some people who are disagreeing, and here are my reasons for saying, okay, I was wrong. I will learn from them. or, and so I presented it that way in terms of Engelhardt versus Lipset. And Lipset changed his views of bringing in values after he read these new arguments of Engelhardt. Then there were a bunch of other things, but so the list of 5. Anybody remember anything? Maybe not exactly the words, but anybody remember some of those 5 that he mentioned and we had in class? Yeah.
One was like free markets.
Okay. Yes.
Blanking on the other ones. I just remember that one.
Anybody want to try? Yeah.
There's liberty, individualism, laissez-faire, and then 2 other that I can't remember. And 3 of them.
The populism and egalitarians.
Okay. What else? Anything about ideas that there's something you didn't understand or something seemed to be messy or whatever? Yeah.
I feel like, how do we interact with Boschkin is he his own, like, I feel like a lot of his ideas, from what I read at least, is like him taking components of like your argument and Sassen's argument and combining them together to give these 7 like descriptors of a global city. Is
Yes.
there anything there that's like his own synthesis, or is that all just like his synthesis is in bringing it all together and making that like, does global city have to meet all 7 of those parameters, or can it only meet a couple?
Even maybe just one. It would be his simple answer. That all of these could be, or are, that is, as I've said many times, this field is big and messy. I mean, so is most of life. So are human beings, or biology, so are our minds, so are our feet, everything. There are disagreements, people disagree on concepts. Don't worry about the fact that they're, but try to look for some coherence and try to build it into an analytical framework that you and others can use. That's what we do in the syllabus. We spend a year, reading, thinking, talking about this. How can we, and so what we have in contrast, and I gave you the example of Sassen's book, which is, a lead book in that field. We disagree with a fundamental view of not being everything top down from Wall Street or markets or one view or whatever, but instead Boschkin takes it even further and says there are many different specific types of globalization. He added, if you will, things that he's worked on in his own personal research, which is transportation. So he talks about freeways, subways, alternatives to cars and things like that, which he plays up. And then earlier for history, rivers and things like that, things of that sort. What is there that both Sassen and almost all the readings include in a definition of globalization, such as we presented it here in the course? Yeah.
Financial services industry or cultural exchange.
Yeah, anybody want to? So financial services industry. Okay, where is that mentioned? It's good question. Is that not mentioned in the readings?
It's mentioned in Sassen, it's mentioned in Boschkin.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Good point. And so then you went on to say change in values, I think.
Or like cultural exchange.
Cultural change. Okay. Yes. That's. But I mean, have we seen any of that in the readings?
Yeah.
Where?
Well, he's seen in Boschkin as one of his like main things is a global center for cultural exchange. So he names as like a quality of a global city.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good points indeed. And is there anything else which is not which is in the course, and we don't even, I'm not even sure if we have a reading on it, but we did have a short video, and it got mentioned then a couple of times later on, and especially is omitted by Sasson in the line coming from Sasson. How did Sasson's perspective work in the past, and especially in Asia?
Talking about the Mongols? The Mongols?
Exactly. So what's the point of the Mongols, and why did we talk about it in this course?
Dispersion of their like ideology and like way of governing to like the entire steppe of like Central Asia and Russia and Ukraine, and kind of like historical impacts that drive like culture, like the cultural development of those states that were affected by the Mongols.
Okay, I mean that good. For instance, did I mentioned briefly in class the very recent last month or so, the Pope visited Mongolia, the first Pope ever in the history of 1500 years. Why did he make a trip to Mongolia, and what did he say? Even his words, which I commented on briefly, which is not what you said. That is, I was surprised at what he said, but what he said was different, at least from so what you said might have said, someone might have said, but he didn't. What did he say? And which you saw a little bit in the video, and we can elaborate right now, just for a little bit, so you can, yeah.
Didn't he say that they were very hospitable? Like they welcomed guests, and when the Pope visited, he said they were very like calm and like not peaceful per se, but kind to guests. And I think in the video it mentioned that it's part of their culture to accept visitors very openly.
Okay. And what did that's a good beginning. Anything of what the Pope himself said beyond that? That is, what did he in his speech? What did he say that the Mongolians brought to the rest of the world, and which might be similar? And I'll have this as a hint to what happened in the Middle Ages in the West, in places like. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, what happened in Italy, France, Germany, Spain? Did they have strong states and governments or whatever? No. What was there for those years? Was there any organization that kept them together? And what was it then?
It was the papacy.
Exactly. The Roman Catholic Church maintained order in ways that were missing from a national government. From the 19th century onward, most of these countries developed strong nation states with bureaucracies, national post offices, transportation, all kinds of things like that, universities. How did the Mongolians do that? Was it in their ideology? So when Tocqueville came to America and he wrote about it, and he said, hey, this, and that is, the French were worried about this idea of democracy was coming to Europe, especially the aristocratic France. What is this silly animal called democracy? So let's take the most strong, deviant case, and he went there. Democracy in America, he wrote. And so the idea was about change. What's the change in culture, which you flagged, and that's a good point. Anybody else want to mention? What's the big point of Tocqueville? The change in culture. A good, A and B. What causes what? That's the big simple point that people have. It's a long book. There's lots of things. So there are many other readers. We can find 100 other ideas and so forth. But the one thing which he's famous for is
about civic action.
Say that again?
Civic action?
Yes, maybe just tell us, so what's the A and the B?
Well, because Americans participate in civic action at such like cultural level of everybody's doing it, that's why they have such a unique democracy, because everybody participates in it. And that's why like declined as per, I forgot who it was that said it. But like the civic decline theory.
Putnam, yeah.
Putnam.
Yeah, so Robert Putnam mostly, yeah, who can answer the question, what did Putnam contribute generally, and we've discussed in the course? It's related to that is, he's basically using the same ideas as Tocqueville, in the same, and you pretty much, remind me your name again?
Kevin.
Kevin pretty much is saying the right thing, but a little bit vague. I mean, if to tell anybody as a simple answer in the elevator, what did Tocqueville bring in his book about? What do you say about democracy in America? The answer was civic activity you stressed, but your answer about the second part was vague. Maybe try to elaborate, or can anybody else elaborate that, including Putnam? Go ahead. Anybody? Kevin or anybody else? Okay, you all should be able to answer this. I mean, this is a simple basic. These are two simple basic questions I'm asking, and you 2 days before the exam, you all should know this already. But if you don't, the dependent variable, which is really stressed later on by Putnam, is legitimacy. That people trust, or legitimacy and trust. People trust each other, they respect each other, they have enough trust in each other that if you say, if we build a fence together, you're a farmer and you grow, and I have sheep in my farm. How can we keep the sheep away from your vegetables? The answer is, let's build a fence together. And if you don't trust each other and you think that the guy with the sheep is going to open it up and let the sheep come in and eat my vegetables, and the trust is not there, it's not working. Okay, so I will add, the French did, and Tocqueville would write about this, they don't trust each other, and they break the rules more often than in rural Massachusetts, when they've been doing things together, like building fences and being in the same church, or shopping from the same guy who's selling milk, or someone who's, that is, the personal sets of relations where people are building, respecting each other, trusting each other based on practice, and not seeing people stealing stuff on the edges, leads to legitimacy in the whole workings of the political system. That's the big idea of Putnam and Tocqueville. So think of it, so if the independent variable is civic activity, which could be, or what would be a couple of examples of civic activity? The most common in, say, Northwest New England. Churches. What are the most common organizations that Western Europeans and Americans are? And Americans especially are in churches. Number 2, unions. Number 3, in Europe, more maybe a political party, but even there, political parties are highly dominated by a small number of people who are activists. So, same way in Europe. So if people are there, and Lipset added as well, he's really, so and I gave you one big criticism I made of Lipset, which was in terms of the comparison of what Elazar added, and what was that? The big thing that Elazar added that Lipset had not done. What's that? You all should be able to answer that. Lipset's talking about the whole US most of the time. Elazar is stressing 3 different regions: New England, Middle Atlantic, and the South. And they have different cultures, different political cultures, different rules of the game. And in terms of what Tocqueville is talking about, and I've used the word several times, Massachusetts stresses these kinds of New England moral, actually, we have a resident, whatever, from Maine. Have you noticed any differences as you travel around the US or in Chicago, or people from other places, or think of my neighborhood of Bronzeville, in terms of trust compared to Freeport?
Yeah, actually, there definitely is like a lot, at least in Maine, especially, and kind of all of New England, like sense of like communal trust in something, and I feel like perhaps maybe less individualism in a sort of way. Like there is individualism, but for like there's just kind of funny anecdote, but I was with my friends and we were trying to find like our Airbnb we were going to, and I was like, oh, let's just go to the next house and ask if they know where the address is. And my friends from the Midwest was like, no, you could get shot for trespassing on someone's property, which like is not really a thing. Like where I'm from, like if someone came up to your house and asked for directions, like people would be very accommodating and stuff. So that's just kind of like a silly anecdote of
No,
like
but that's
the
important.
difference.
That's not a silly anecdote at all.
But yeah, just kind of in New England, like the sense of, there is like definitely a sense of like community internally, which does like in some ways is like a lot of support and like organizing, but also I found like kind of downside to that is like sometimes there is like distrust of like an outsider, but insider, like there's like a lot more like kind of politeness and like a sense of like, oh, like you're from Maine, like you're a Mainer versus like, oh, the tourists, and like I roll at that. So
What's perhaps the most famous source, or at least novel, critiquing what you've just, agreeing with you, but giving you the most powerful example written nearby in the 19th century?
19th century. Did you say, could be wrong, our town? No?
Well, I wasn't thinking of that, but anything else that would be in Salem, Massachusetts, about Salem.
Yeah, the Crucible.
The
Crucible? That's in Salem.
the book is called The Scarlet Letter. You know which letter it is? A. Okay. Good part of your but the general point is, he, the author, lived in Salem and then taught at Bowdoin, where I went to college, and he saw exactly what you're seeing, but he said, you trust the people there that you know, but not necessarily the others, and that tends to lead to thinking the same way, that I trust people and he's okay, this is a good person to be a friend with, but if everybody has to be the same, this disagrees with cosmopolitanism or innovativeness or doing new things. So in a sense, it's a conflict between a parochialism, a value-lated adjective, or noun, or parochial, leads to, for cities in this course on global, local, I mean the two titles of the course, global and local, are inherently often in conflict. And so he wrote about a single letter in ways that would lead to a challenge of this kind of perspective. Okay, so I'm leaving you a few hints, and in the rest of your years, you can read it and explore more and see where and why this is important for these broader issues. In the worlds which has gone a lot further with this, with the cell phones, with social media, with Facebook, etc. So, who else has another question? Yes.
I was wondering if we could circle back to the Mongols and why they're important.
Yes.
I feel like I still am a little iffy on that.
Good. No, good. Yeah, maybe I didn't elaborate enough. I asked the question, what structures maintain coherence in the Middle Ages in Europe? And the answer is the Roman Catholic Church. As a hierarchical organization, it also had branches of, stronger and slight variations, but not very much. It was a strong hierarchy. Quasi-military, you could say. Or a stronger state, like later states in the 19th century. What the Pope said about the Mongols was, you brought to the world a strong, positive example of maintaining order in the world where you were historically important in ways that if it did not have your presence, it would have been less good. Okay. What's an example, say, of Russia? Anybody know a little bit of tidbit of Russian history, why that's so important? Yeah.
These acts kind of, at least when they're the Soviet Union, they acted in the same capacity of like maintaining order over a bunch of conflicting cultural groups and ethnic groups.
Just add another sentence or two just to make it clear, or example. Or
Like an example being they maintain control over Yugoslavia and the Balkans while also maintaining control over Belarus and Ukraine and Kazakhstan and like Uzbekistan and all those countries that are now having a lot of issues with each other, but under that same umbrella of the Soviet Union, they have no issues with each other.
Exactly. Okay, that's the point. And why did the Mongols succeed in conquering the area we can term Russia or the former Soviet area? Because there was no state, there was no czar, there was no organization like the Roman Catholic Church, which was in Western Europe. And so with the Mongolians arrived as horsemen, ready to burn a city if they didn't follow joining with you, then their reputation was that they could be very tough, very brutal, and completely destroy the city. And so when the people in Russia, people in Poland, they knew this reputation and they were afraid of these Mongolians. And so most of the Russians might have a duke or a leader of a smaller regional area, and most of them said, "Oh, welcome. We're glad to have you here, and we're glad to have our kids learn about Mongolian language." But the Mongolians did not say that. They didn't say, "You want to learn about us as a culture from Mongolia. You don't need to learn our language. You don't need to have that. That is." And so the important administrative point which the Pope was making was he essentially what if we were in America, people would say this is federalism. That is, it's like the British colonial administration, which I talked briefly about, the contrast with the British colonialism was different from most of the other European colonialisms. The French, the Belgians, the Germans, the Spanish, They tended to be very tough, and they killed a lot of people who tried to do differently. The British did not, and the Mongols did not. That is, so what they did, what the Mongolians did was provide an example of collecting money. So you had to pay some taxes, 5%, 10%, whatever of profits, or if you're cattle or something like that, you would have to give to a local administrator. And that would then be sold, or they would take the sheep to, somewhere else. That is, the fees or the administration would that is, the Mongolians would take some money back to Mongolia, or would be given in jewels or whatever like that. But it was small. And most of life and most of the economy, most of the culture of Russia and of Ukraine and these areas continued under the Mongolian administration. And I will add one more point, which we didn't see the broader. I mean, I learned these things only myself in some detail about the last 5 years. And I brought it into this course, but I'll just add a point which links with Lipset and with what we've just said with Putnam and the others. And you saw a little bit about how the Mongolian military was structured. And what you saw was it has a tough, hierarchy at the top. And it said at the bottom, we maybe have 100 divisions. But if one of these divisions has everybody working together, if one of them deserts, leaves and runs away, what happens?
They're all killed.
They're all killed. So that's the rule of the game. And what that says is, don't desert and don't let anybody else around you desert, because you all will be at risk of losing your lives. Okay, so that's one part. The other critical part, which was not in what we saw, but if you learn a little more, whether or not they would fight or would attack a particular part of the battle being when it's in the middle of the battle going on, okay, I mean, here there's some space over there. Should we attack over there? The point is, you with your little division, you could say, if you're only 10 people, say, should we go there or here? And they would then agree. They don't just have one person at the top, or some higher person who says always attack on the left or the right, or whether they have red uniforms or something like that. There was and this is what is often featured as a Western style of military action, in which war, and this has been said 100 times in the newspaper, which you've read about in the area around Ukraine. What have you heard about the Ukraine that relates to this Mongolian example? How is the West compared with who else in the Ukraine area now? You've all read about this stuff. Come on, it's a simple question. Just reminding you of what you know. I'm trying to link it to what you've read about in the press with what I'm telling you now about the history, because it's ironic. The newspapers say all the time, when you say, well, why are the Ukrainians able to persist at all as well? Because they're a little country and Russia's a big country. Russia's got a lot more. They've got all the tanks. They've got cannons. They've got high-tech stuff. And you're a little country. How are you able to do this at all? And the answer all the militaries say is, what the Ukrainians are doing is killing a general or killing a high-level person, and the people underneath don't know what to do. Whereas in the West, and they talk about not just the U.S., they often talk about with the Western military teaches more autonomy to figure out how you can decide as a smaller group at a lower level, one person alone, or maybe with 6 people together, fighting together to do things in ways that will act and be thoughtful, even if our lieutenant got killed. Okay. This is what the Mongolians did, and that's how they beat many of those other armies. They had local autonomy, and they had more morale, high morale at the very bottom, and it was not simply follow the orders from the top. By contrast, in that sense, it was different. So, I'll give one example. When Bill Clinton was president of the U.S., the U.S. Army was having a hard time recruiting troops. This was not too far after the Vietnam War, and basically people were going to college, and fewer people were joining. So they had a new Secretary of Defense, and they created a new video that was very dramatic, and it showed a guy in the desert running along across the desert. It was a beautiful surrounding, sunrise, pretty water, other kinds of stuff. So it was a great place to be. He looked strong. He was handsome. He was confident in what he was doing. He was having a good time. He's running alone across the desert. And the name of it was the Army of One. And the idea was that individualism as an American value could be consistent with hierarchy of the U.S. Army. And this is an extreme case of the same idea, that the 2 or 3 people or 6 people, and this was a famous studies of World War II soldiers. First of these stolen letters from the Wehrmacht, the German army under Hitler, found this by two sociologists here at the University of Chicago, Edward Schultz. And then they did the same thing called the American soldier, and they did surveys to try this. And the top military said, oh no, that can't be true. That is, the people at the bottom really are really critical. And so the sociologists and psychologists said, hey, that these people at the bottom in the army are really critical to make the thing really work or lose. And the American generals, the French generals, the German generals all disagreed, and the research finally has largely succeeded. But I'm illustrating a battle between hierarchy and more decentralization or individualism, and how you can join those 5 values that Lipset talked about within, and that's what I'm showing you with the Union Democracy book and the Saskatchewan Socialism book and the Michel's book on political parties. All 3 show the same kind of thing. By looking at organizations and how they work at different levels, you get very different rules of the game. And the Mongolians did this. So they're very hierarchical, I would say in the middle. But at the very top, with Genghis Khan himself, he was very personable, very open, and would learn. That is, he wanted, as they would say, strategy. Where should he go, and where should you? And so they learned, for instance, don't go into the mountains because you can't ride horseback. You can't, stay where you're on the plains, and you want to stay where the horses can. And so, getting into India, Tibet and all that stuff was there, so they never went into India, etc. And parts of Western Europe, as it was, I think, was in the film. But the big point is another way that this is used within another related context. This is the V.I. Lenin had a principle called democratic centralism, and the idea is we will all open and discuss what should the policy be, and at that stage, we all will look for good ideas and help each other. But once we agree on the policy, we're going to implement it with centralism. And so we then don't have variations. We don't challenge the policy once we've agreed on that plan. Okay, so that's the phase which he stressed with that label. So that's a competing label to the answer which Lipset gave to the hierarchy, where hierarchy doesn't always dominate. But they're big literatures on each of these points that I've made. There are lots of books and papers on just what I've talked about. But these are summaries, distilled hierarchy, distilled conclusions of a couple of hundred years with hundreds and thousands of papers and discussions on these issues. I'm just trying to say, if you can learn from the past, you don't make all the same mistakes as people did in the past. It's hard, but that's why you're in a university with the idea that you don't have to do everything by yourself. How are we doing on that? Other comments, questions on anything? Anything else? I'm looking myself at what I haven't talked about here, just to point out that I'm assuming, encouraging, hoping that you will read stuff that I don't talk about, if they have at least a star. Or other things which I've usually talked about this stuff even though there are no stars, but because I wanted to bring out quickly the main points, and that's what's generally in the syllabus. I'm looking at it myself right now. Well, Christopher Bale, terrified how anti-Muslim fringe organizations became mainstream. Anybody look at that? And I said maybe a word or two on it. But, okay. So I'm giving you an example of things. It has 1 star. Things it's good. So we say here, much is on Google Books and Amazon website, splendid analysis of how social media spread anti-Muslim views and organized groups led political leaders to change their framing of Muslims in the U.S. Careful evidence. Anybody see? I'll say a word or two on this because it's a very, very thoughtful book. Why? One, it doesn't have one theory. It has multiple different theories, and they differentially work for different phases and different subgroups, all of which together have generated this huge change. Huge change indicated by when President Bush said 9/11 just happened, but you should be very careful that many Muslims are good American citizens and most of them obey the law, and this is an extreme version of terrorists, and don't be anti-Muslim. Okay, the president said that repeatedly, right in each speech about this at the beginning. 5 years later, those qualifications were gone. Why did the political leaders change their views and their actions, at least in framing Muslims are dangerous? What he shows is that there were a couple of very active. If you're coughing with a bad cold.
I'm not with a cold.
Okay, not a cold. Okay,
Yeah.
Good point. If that is what I was going to say. It's please use the videos if you have a cold. Is what I'm saying, especially if you cough, but even if you don't. Okay. I've got a lot of colds. For instance, there was a small number of really active anti-Muslim groups, and they had websites, and they're only, one or two people were the leaders of it, and then they try to get 10 or 20 others, but then they spread it up to 100 or 200 people. Little things like this started, and then others were trying to connect this, and so some of the data could come from looking at social media. Then some things could come from local organizations. You could create a new organization. Let's protect us against terrorism, something like that. And that new organization could have not social media as its data source. You study where and why and how do people create a new civic group, and what are the dynamics of building a civic group that works successfully. Then a third kind of thing would be how to spread this to political leaders, and then that gets to things like lobbying. So if you want to lobby, you then have go to the leaders if it's the state capital, or if it's in Washington D.C. and you want to change the national. So that they didn't start with Washington; they started locally in much smaller areas. But then they got up to Washington, and they changed the ways that the President of the United States would speak about Muslims in dramatic ways. Okay. So multi-causality, and it's not as if one hypothesis is right or wrong. Each of these are right, but as you pointed, as we talked about, in examples from Russia or from Ukraine or Yugoslavia, there are different answers that are right in a different phase, and I'm playing that up more this year than I have in past years, because we're getting more and more of this surrounding us all the time. We're having all kinds of things going on social media, in novels, and in advertisements, in debates over who's the Democrat, or say within the Democratic and Republican leadership, they fall apart because they're killing each other, or say arguing with each other heatedly. Within these top groups in Washington, within the Chicago City Council, the same thing. We have 4 caucuses with the Chicago City Council. They don't care so much about the mayor. They care about their caucus, the Black Caucus, the LGBTQ. I'm trying to think of the 4. I mean, there are 4 of these, but they and then background could be the mayor. The background could be the old machine style. All these are different strategies of where and why decisions get made in the Chicago City Council. And so to be aware of those 4, you need to be aware that they exist, is to say, what are who's doing what and why? And because they have very different rules of the game of what's right and wrong. And right now, we're not getting a budget passed, and the whole war. I mean, that the U.S. money and the NATO funding and military and tanks and all this stuff is being not altogether stopped, but it's way cut back, because we're a couple of weeks away for within the Ukraine, because of why? The simple, narrow, small cause. 15 or so Republicans in the U.S. They're not senators. They're new, young Republicans who are saying, we don't want to give Biden what he wants. We're going to give him a hard time, and we want something else that we want, which will stop. And so what we will do is not vote for money for the Ukraine, even if many of those U.S. congressmen favor helping the Ukraine, but they're not voting for it because it's okay. So these rationales are critical to understand what's happening. Okay, and what I'm trying to say is that's what we call the context, or the scene, as we'll get to in the next section. Next week we'll talk about that in more detail. for now.
Are there any other questions about the midterm
Yeah.
that we can answer for you right now?
Yeah, 2 last minutes.
If not, you have our emails. Email us. It'll be on Canvas. I'll send out a thing about how to access it. But yeah, any other questions? Great. So you should all do amazing on it. It'll be great. If you've done the readings, you'll all be fine.
Okay. Thank you all.